We need to talk about some of these absolutely insane updates around Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. This only just dropped a couple of days ago, but the situation surrounding this DLC has already become a roller coaster. As pretty much all of us saw, Shadow of the Erdtree debuted to the absolutely insane 98% recommended on OpenCritic, along with a near perfect 94 overall rating from media. And that is genuinely a pretty big deal, as this immediately thrust the expansion into being the highest rated DLC ever on Metacritic, with CDPR coming forward to admit defeat after their own Witcher 3 DLC held this honor as the highest rated expansion for the past 8 years, but now has been surpassed by Shadow of the Erdtree. And just looking at this at face value, yeah, it's impressive to get this high of a score from this many media outlets. They had a healthy review window where many people could dive deep into this game, so it's a genuine score for the DLC. But what made things even crazier when it came to some of these reviews is it wasn't even just good reviews. Tons of these reviews were describing the new content as phenomenal, but also how there was a ton of content here, as it really seems like FromSoft downplayed the size of the expansion overall, so many reviewers found that the expansion was even larger than many had been expecting. So in many ways, based off the amount of content that just came out for Elden Ring, it kind of feels like we got Elden Ring 2, and it's getting absolutely phenomenal reviews. And as we get to launch on Steam, the great news only continued. Elden Ring's player count skyrocketed to 780,000 players on Saturday, nearing the game's all-time peak of 953,000. And we really do just need to appreciate how mind-numbingly insane that number is. 780,000 returned to a game after a 2-year wait, and actually over 2 years by a few months, as well as the only way to even start this DLC is by beating an endgame boss. For a lot of games, and even a lot of franchises, that's a death sentence for a DLC, to have that big of a gap and have that big of a barrier to entry, but for Shadow of the Erdtree and Elden Ring, it's really not making that big of a difference. This player count number would be great for a new game launching, but this is just for a DLC, which makes it bonkers. If Shadow of the Erdtree was a complete standalone game, it would have just set the record for the 12th best launch in Steam history. But as insane as this launch was shaping up to be, it did hit a bit of a roadblock, as almost immediately after debuting on Steam, Shadow of the Erdtree's fan reviews began to plummet, and even the base game did see an influx of negative reviews start to come in. And as of today, things have reached the point where the highest rated DLC in Metacritic history is now sitting at a mixed rating on Steam, with just 62% of the nearly 30,000 reviews being positive. What on earth is going on here? What is causing this monumental gap in between critic ratings and fan ratings for this DLC? This means that nearly 40% of the reviews being left for this right now are negative. Are the critics wrong, or is this some kind of review bomb? Funny enough, in nearly all of the posts and videos I see trying to break down and explain what exactly is going on here, the author is missing a massive piece of the puzzle, because many of these negative reviews for Shadow of the Erdtree aren't coming from the West. On Steam right now, 81% of the reviews in English are positive for this DLC. And while yeah, it's definitely a bit lower than some of the critic reviews, it also doesn't explain the 62%. As in reality, the overwhelming majority of negative reviews for Shadow of the Erdtree are being posted in Chinese. Simply switching your language on Steam to Chinese will show that Chinese reviews have a mere 31% positive rate, while still making up nearly 1/3 of the overall reviews. So this has created this really weird situation where you have a bunch of Redditors as well as some media outlets trying to explain and figure out why the Elden Ring reviews are dropping so much. But at the same time, a lot of the Reddit posts and just general, a lot of the posting online is positive, so people are confused. And the reality is, most of these Chinese players aren't posting on Reddit, but instead on Bilibili or Weibo. And after browsing these websites, you get a much clearer picture of why many Chinese fans are mad right now. It's not just a simple review bomb. And one of the biggest complaints right now comes around difficulty. This DLC gives me the feeling that I am a disabled person without legs and dying with tubes inserted. I'm asked to box with Tyson and Ali at the same time. I really don't know how to play it. Many of the posts upset with the DLC are upset with the ramp up in difficulty specifically. They enter the DLC with a well-leveled character that was dominating in the base game, only to be one-shot killed by one of the first bosses they encountered during the DLC. Even Platin Sax didn't dare to kill me with one fire, but you, a little flying dragon, killed my 50 health heavy armored Atai with one fire. How can I fight you? And I think that last point is the real important distinction here. There are thousands of users frustrated with this ramp up in difficulty, even for high-level characters, but it's not just the difficulty. Many find the design of the new bosses to also be frustrating, citing the insane degree of mobility, as well as very long movesets, making the challenge just not nearly as enjoyable as previously. And I think this does start to get to the core problem here. Lots of the new bosses can kill you immediately, as well as gap close exceptionally fast compared to the base game. So in quite a few of these fights, you might end up dying within the first couple of seconds. And I think a lot of fans are feeling frustrated in that they don't know how to proceed. It's not just, oh, it's hard, let me spend a couple of hours figuring out this boss fight. It's, I'm getting smashed so badly that I don't even know where to begin as far as figuring this out goes. Now, whether you agree or disagree with that criticism is one thing, but it's definitely at the core of why many of these negative reviews, at least the Chinese ones, are being posted. But that definitely isn't the only complaint. Shadow the Erdtree is also facing major backlash due to some of its performance issues. This is prevalent everywhere. It's definitely not just Chinese audiences complaining about this one. Many fans are finding that they were able to run the base game at a relatively solid 60 FPS, but many of the new areas added with the DLC will have a massive cost to FPS, dropping to 50, 40, or even at points 30. Specifically, this dancing lion boss is getting a ton of backlash as many users find the hardest part of the fight is camera management as well as brutal FPS you'll deal with. And you can find tons of posts online of people playing with the top GPU on the market, a 4090, and still dropping to 30 FPS while playing this DLC. Those are by far the two biggest complaints coming out of the Chinese audiences, but it's definitely not everything. I've seen plenty of Western fans trying to make this a simple case of players being bad, but the criticisms as well as conversation are definitely more nuanced than that. A boring story and lackluster map are also major criticisms, as many feel the exploration is far less rewarding in the DLC. Many of the NPCs you encounter are described as flat and uninteresting, and you can even see here, one user pushing back that people are complaining the game is too hard, and a fan responds, suffering is one thing, but the map is awful. This is the first time I've seen a dead end without any reward in a Souls game, and you can't go back the same way. What kind of groove design is this? That's likely meant to say dungeon, but you know, Google Translate. And many other Chinese fans are echoing similar sentiments, saying that exploration is just not nearly as well rewarded here. This revelation that the majority of the negative reviews are coming from China has really just started to become apparent on some forums in the West, and the response is about what you'd expect. Many simply stating that the Chinese players need to get good, but it definitely seems like there might be a bit more going on here. It certainly seems like there is a cultural aspect at play. And Daniel Ahmad, who is a gaming analyst focused on Asia, weighs in, mentioning how Steam reviews are often treated as more of a comment section in China, because Steam community is blocked, plus there's a firewall in general. So reviews are always somewhat in reaction to X thing. Games being overly unfair has always been a thing that leads to negative reviews, especially when there aren't a ton of guides in Chinese available. And that definitely was one point I noticed after actually reading many of the posts on Weibo. The discussion were pretty similar to Reddit discussions, where people saying things are hard and other players telling them just to get good. I almost wonder if we really are just seeing a subset of the Chinese audience who are frustrated leaving reviews, while most players who are enjoying the game aren't venturing all the way over to Steam to do that. I think we may really be seeing that vocal minority in action here, and it'll be interesting to see how this evolves. Are players just going to learn that you need a bunch of these Erdtree blessings to survive, or will reviews continue to be negative for the otherwise highly rated expansion? Because at the end of the day, this seems to be exactly what the DLC's director intended. We've kind of really pushed the envelope in terms of what we think can be withstood by the player. Of course, some bosses are a necessary part of the story development and arc, but some are not. The ones that aren't are especially difficult, I think will pose a very good challenge and obstacle for players. This DLC was always intended to ramp up the difficulty, but perhaps you're seeing a situation where, for at least some fans of Elden Ring, this level of difficulty is no longer fun for them. But at the same time, we almost see a similar situation to what happened with Starfield. Yeah, sure, the fan reviews on Steam aren't the best, but it seems pretty clear that Shadow the Erdtree is a critical as well as a financial success just based off the sheer number of people playing this game right now. So outside of FromSoft tweeting out some hints to try and make things a bit easier on the players, I can't imagine we see much changed. I definitely don't imagine any nerfs coming as a result of this backlash, particularly when you consider that the DLC already seems to be a critical and financial success, and really a massive success on both of those fronts. With that said, this is the recent update on Elden Ring, and get subscribed for more.